Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome and thank you for your interest in serving as a reviewer for the NSF Regional Innovation Engines program. My name is Dimitri Perkins, and I'm the lead program officer for the Engines program and also a professor of computer science and electrical engineering at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. The Engines team, which you see on the slide here, is very excited to have so many folks that have a strong interest in serving as part of the review process. And we all look forward to working with you to select the strongest set of proposals as possible. Today's webinar will serve as an introduction and overview of the Engines proposal review process. You are welcome to post questions via the Zoom Q&A feature. We will be collecting questions and conducting a Q&A at the end of today's presentation. But we kindly ask that you limit your questions to the proposal review process, which is the focus of today's presentation. For more information about the Engines program itself or submitting a proposal, we invite you to visit the Engines website via the links posted in the chat. And you may also send questions to the program team at engines@nsf.gov. So the roadmap for today. Before we dive into the proposal review process, I would like to take a few minutes to provide an overview of the Engines program, and then that will be followed by an overview of the expectations and responsibilities of an NSF reviewer, and then that will be followed by a discussion of the specific panel review process and review criteria of the NSF Engines Type 1 proposals. And again, we will have a Q&A, so if you can begin posting questions in the Q&A, or you can hold them until the end of the presentation. So just briefly, for those that may not already be familiar with NSF, the National Science Foundation is an independent federal agency created by Congress in 1950. NSF is vital because we support basic research and people to create knowledge that transforms the future. This type of support is a primary driver of the US economy, enhances national security, and advances knowledge to sustain global leadership. By the numbers, NSF has an annual budget of about $8.5 billion as of FY 2022, with 94% of those dollars going directly to support research, education, and related activities. So just briefly, to give you some idea of the structure of NSF, NSF is organized into directorates, where each directorate supports a specific research and innovation area and seeks to develop programs that will support researchers, organizations, and other entities within that scientific and engineering community. Now, while TIP is a new directorate, it does not have its own community that it seeks to support. Instead, TIP is a horizontal that seeks to support activities of the research community funded by NSF across all directorates and offices. TIP programs such as the Engines program will fund awardees across all scientific and innovation disciplines. TIP is structured to take advantage of the changing science and engineering enterprise. Ultimately, TIP is looking to harness the nation's vast and diverse talent pool to advance critical and emerging technologies, address pressing societal and economic challenges, and accelerate the translation of research results from the lab to the market and to society by leveraging expertise and partnerships. TIP improves US competitiveness. It helps grow the US economy, and of course, train a diverse workforce for the future in the hopes of having high-paid, high-wage jobs. So, as noted previously, the newly formed TIP Directorate is charged with catalyzing new innovation ecosystems throughout the US. One way in which NSF plans to enable these new innovation ecosystems is through the funding of what we call NSF Engines. And these engines will drive R&D and innovation, both in terms of advancing critical technologies with an equal emphasis on developing local talent and the related workforce. Each NSF engine will be centered around a specific geographical region of service and will focus on a selected topic of national and societal significance, motivated by that region's strengths and regional economy. NSF engines will be funded up to $160 million over 10 years. Awards will also be funded for teams not yet ready to launch a full-scale NSF engine. These awards, which we refer to as developmental awards, are up to $1 million over 2 years. And proposals for the developmental awards are the focus of this webinar and the current review process, which you have stated that you have an interest in participating. So what exactly is an engine? NSF envisions an engine as a coalition of partners and stakeholders coming together from a variety of sectors across industry, government, academia, and nonprofit organizations. And each engine will be led by a full-time CEO. The engine coalition must be primarily made up of regional organizations who jointly invest in the economic growth of their region. Of course, partners can exist outside of the region, but all must contribute to the advancement of the region itself. And just to distinguish between an NSF engine, so imagine here we have an NSF engine, which is the entity we just described, distinguish the NSF engine from the ecosystem itself. And so as the engine implements its activities and efforts, then it should have an impact, a great impact on the regional innovation ecosystem and grow that innovation ecosystem. So as we've already alluded to, an NSF engine is not simply about conducting research in any specific technology area, but more so focused on kind of larger challenges, societal, economic challenges. Here are just some examples around climate change, equitable access to healthcare, critical infrastructure, and the technology and use-inspired research kind of provide the foundation to establish the innovation ecosystem and grow the innovation ecosystem in any given particular region. So we keep using the term a region of service, and so we want to provide some clarity around this notion of region of service. And so generally, the definition of a region of service is a U.S. geographical area. It could be as small as a large metropolitan area, including rural areas, to actually multiple states. It's really up to the region and its stakeholders to define the geographical area and determine what makes sense for that particular region. So in this slide, we provide some examples of the structure that an engine might pursue as an entity and who the leading entity might be in any given engine. For the purpose of this presentation, the point of this slide is really to demonstrate that in a given engine, the stakeholders must exist across a wide spectrum of organizations, universities, the local and state governments, industry partners, all must come together as a regional coalition to establish an engine. And although a single entity may actually submit the proposal, NSF views this as a regional activity, and it really should be a proposal that represents the region's efforts, not just a single entity. So NSF envisions an engine as having a set of characteristics that fall into 3 categories. And we'll just briefly highlight these. First, R&D innovation to achieve economic growth. The second is building an inclusive innovation ecosystem that will thrive for decades to come. And third is the flexibility in the management and leadership structure. If we're going to actually build an engine that's going to thrive, then the leadership structure must be accountable, must have mechanisms to evaluate itself, and the structure must allow for flexibility and nimbleness as the engine attempts to address specific technical challenges and have a societal impact. So here we just show the NSF Engines 5-phase model. We use this model to describe the different stages of maturity that we expect an innovation ecosystem to go through. And so in phase 1, developmental phase, this would correspond to the type 1 proposals, where you have a region that needs to, perhaps has already defined the scope, but needs to develop the strategic plans, establish partnerships. And then you would have phase 2 through 5 as that entity would grow and mature along with the its related innovation ecosystem. So we won't go through all the details, but you can find the details in the actual BAA that describe the maturity level of each phase. The important point here is that for phase 1 is what we would consider type 1 proposals. So those regions that are in the initial stages of development, bringing together their partners. This is the purpose of a type 1 proposal, which is what we're considering in this proposal review process. And then type 2 are those that are in the nascent stages that are further along, perhaps have established partnerships and would be ready to launch an engine on day 1. So expected number of awards and the start date. So for type 1 awards, the anticipated start date is March 15th, and we expect to fund up to 50 type 1 proposals. Type 2 awards are anticipated to be announced in fall 2023. And in the first round for type 1, we expect to fund up to 5 full engines. So I'll stop right here and hand it over to my colleague to discuss serving as a reviewer, provide an overview there, and also discuss the review criteria and other related points in terms of reviewing type 1 proposals. Michal.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dimitri. My name is Michal Zival, and I'm going to now give you a general overview of what serving as a proposal reviewer for NSF entails. So to start out with, you can see here the steps from proposal submission to awards. The red circle that you see is where you fit in as a reviewer. But to start with the first step, after proposals are submitted, the NSF program team will check for compliance with the guidelines specified in the BAA funding call. And we then put the proposals into groups, or what we call panels, to be reviewed as a set. For this program, we expect to have around 15 proposals in each of our sets or each of our panels. At this point, we rely on, in the process, we rely on experts such as yourselves to help inform us of which proposals we should consider for funding. So around 8 to 10 reviewers will be asked to serve on each panel. And again, the job of each panel is to make funding recommendations to NSF as to which proposals on that particular panel they believe are worthy of support. Each panel will be facilitated by a couple of NSF Engines program directors. And after that, the NSF program team will look through the full set of recommendations across all the panels, and we will make the final decisions of which proposals to fund. Awards are then made, and for this particular program, they'll be made as cooperative agreements between NSF and each awarded team so as to give flexibility to NSF to provide input and some level of oversight to the awarded teams. We'll go to the next slide. So in order to do this review effectively, we need reviewers such as all of you from across the US, reflecting the range of expertise and demographic diversity that is required for successful NSF engines and ultimately a thriving innovation ecosystem. And so we'll need expertise from the range of sectors, including, as noted earlier, industry, government, nonprofits, for-profits, academia, and really institutions of higher education of all different types. Also the various components that comprise an NSF engine. So including the cross-sector partnership building, people with expertise in workforce development, regional economic development, lab to market translation, what it means to carry out use-inspired research, expertise with investing in startup companies, and those with expertise in diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. So you can really see we need that gamut of expertise to cover the broad range of areas that we are expecting to have in the engines. And also in the type 1 proposals in particular in this case. We'll also need experts from across the topic areas represented in the proposals. We'll figure that more as they come in, but as an example, these will cover different aspects of health, agriculture, climate change, smart manufacturing, energy and transportation sectors, and many other areas. So we want to emphasize that due to the way that we will group proposals during the review process, individuals who are submitting a type 1 or a type 2 NSF Engines proposal may still be eligible to serve as reviewers. And many of you will be very strong reviewers because you're already familiar with the program. So please consider reviewing even if you are part of a proposal. All right, next slide. So you may now be wondering what you're signing up for when you agree to serve as a reviewer. Well, most of the reviewers will be serving as a panelist. The program director facilitating your panel will assign to you 6 to 8 proposals to review individually, and you'll have around 3 weeks to complete these reviews. You'll then join a 2-day panel. On the first day, you and your fellow reviewers on your panel would discuss each of the 15 or so proposals on your panel, and you'll provide input only on the set that you reviewed. And then for each proposal, one of the reviewers will take notes so as to prepare a short summary of the discussion, which is then drafted prior to the second day. You'll then join the second day of the panel to finalize your recommendations about the proposal and your written summary of the recommendation. You can see here our estimate for the time commitment for each of these steps. So after all the proposals are reviewed on panels, the NSF program team may reach out to additional reviewers to provide individual reviews, which we call ad hoc reviews, if we think that we need specialized expertise on any of the highly rated proposals. What we're really asking for, though, today is for people to serve as panelists. And so I want to also note that serving as a panelist is a question that often comes up. Do you receive any compensation? So you do receive a token amount of compensation. It's $200 a day for the 2-day panel. So it's a total of $400. You don't receive compensation for the time spent on your individual reviews. And so that said, why should you consider serving as a reviewer? The next slide. So one reason is that it's the public service. You each have specialized expertise within different aspects of the innovation ecosystems, and you can lend that expertise to help best funnel federal public funding. Second, this is a program with potential for very high impact, as it's looking to shape the landscape of emerging technologies and innovation across the US. And by serving as a reviewer, you can be part of shaping that landscape. And third, as I noted, the panels are going to be comprised of experts from a range of sectors and expertise, and serving on the panel will provide you as a reviewer the opportunity to interact with this diverse set of experts across the US innovation ecosystem. So we're going to backtrack now for a few minutes to describe the goals and outputs of the review process. We call the NSF review of proposals the external merit review process, since we involve reviewers external to NSF. And the aim is to ensure that we're focusing on the merits of the proposals themselves rather than perceptions outside of the proposal. So we have 3 goals in this process. The first, as we've discussed, is to provide advice to the NSF program team as to which proposals are worthy of support. Second is to ensure that we're providing quality feedback to the proposing team so that they have a clear understanding as to what was viewed favorably and why and what areas could be improved. And third, we want to uphold the high standard and even-handedness in the review and process so as to preserve the trust of the proposing teams, Congress, and the public. Okay, next slide. I'll say a little more now about what we actually mean by that last point. So NSF receives proposals in confidence, and so we protect the confidentiality of the content, which includes ensuring that the content of the proposals is only discussed during the panel hours, and that the reviewers do not use or disclose any material from the proposals that they review. We also aim to eliminate implicit bias in the review process by rating on explicit criteria, asking reviewers to point to specific evidence to support their judgments, rather than providing global judgment. In the next section of the webinar, I'll explain more about how we actually do this. Okay, next slide. So during this review process, each proposal ends up with a set of at least 4 individual reviews that describe specific, as we said before, specific strengths, weaknesses, and an individual rating of that proposal as to whether it should be funded, and also a written panel summary that describes the panel's collective perspective on the strengths and weaknesses, and the collective rating and recommendation of the proposal as to the enthusiasm for it being funded. All of this content is shared with the proposing team upon a decision of an award or a decline by the NSF program team. And all of this content is anonymized so that the proposing teams do not know who reviewed their proposals. Okay, so next slide. A few words now on, there we go. A few words now on the conflict of interest, or COIs. We have a set of rules both for NSF and some specific to the NSF Engines program in order to remove or limit both the influence and also the appearance of influence of ties to an applicant or to an applying institution that could affect the advice of the reviewers and the merit review process. NSF will work with individuals who we ask to serve as reviewers to ensure that you do not have a COI. So a couple of highlights to note are that proposals will be grouped into pools based on several factors, and proposals will be considered for funding separately within the various pools. So as I mentioned earlier, as applicants to type 1 proposals may be eligible to participate as a reviewer, and same with type 2. In particular, these individuals will be placed on a panel in a different pool from the one where their proposal is being considered. And also keep in mind that most reviewers will actually have COIs of some sort, potentially related to employment, individuals who they collaborate with on different activities, maybe close friends, or a company where they have private stock holdings. But please do not let this deter you from serving as a reviewer. NSF will work with the reviewers who are a good fit for the program to determine a panel where they are eligible to serve as a reviewer. Okay, the next slide. So now we'll move into some specifics of reviewing for the NSF Engines Type 1 proposals, which again is the focus of what we're recruiting for at the moment. And this will just be a brief overview, as the real detailed information will be provided at the time that we select the reviewers for specific panels. So first, when you agree to serve as a reviewer, you'll receive access to a set of proposals. Within those, there'll be several main sections that you will review. These will include the project description, that's the core of the proposal, and describes the vision, the plan, and the overall story of the team. You will also be reviewing the section on new and existing resources, the letters of collaboration, bio-sketches of the key personnel on the team, and to a certain extent, the budget and the related budget justification. You will then be given guidance on what to look for in the proposals to consider its strengths and weaknesses. The review for this program will center around a set of criteria categories that you see here. The BAA funding call describes a set of criteria for the Type 1 development awards, and there's a different set that's for Type 2. These include around the purpose and vision, the regional importance and impact, the leadership team, and so forth. And if we go to the next slide, for those familiar with NSF reviewing, you'll be aware that all NSF proposals are reviewed for intellectual merit, which is the potential to advance knowledge, and broader impacts, which is the potential to benefit society and contribute to the achievement of specific societal outcomes. But for this program, we'll be considering these standard criteria within the context of the program-specific criteria that I just mentioned on the previous slide. So now to say a little bit more about those program-specific criteria. On the next slide. We provide details within the BAA funding call on what these criteria mean. And again, we'll go into much more detail on this once we've recruited the reviewers, but to give you a sense, for the purpose and vision, we ask you to consider questions such as the following. To what extent does the topic area defined by the proposed engine address compelling national and or societal challenges? Are the scale and scope of the proposed scientific and technical work likely to make significant progress on addressing the challenges? And you can see the others over here on this list. And then similarly for the regional importance and impact, there's questions such as whether the maturity of the regional innovation ecosystem is aligned with the goals of the program, to what extent is the proposed work driven by the application's needs and capabilities that are important to the local regional economy. If you go to the next slide, you can see that again, for each criteria, we have a set of questions. And again, these are listed in the BAA, and we would go into more of a discussion really with the reviewers, what we really mean by these questions, so that you'd have a sense before reviewing and you could really speak to this with your strengths and weaknesses of these aspects of the in the proposals. So this is for the leadership team, for the partnerships. And if we continue on, we can see for the workforce development, the diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and the risk identification and adaptability. Okay, so go to the next slide. So what you do then in practice is that reviewers are provided a review template of the sort that you see here to guide you through the process and make sure that you're focusing again on those strengths and weaknesses of the review criteria, really the content that is in the proposal. But really taking into, using your expertise, but then looking to where you can point to real strengths and weaknesses. And I'll note also that if you're new to this process, we typically ask the reviewers to submit at least one review earlier than the other so that the program director for the panel can provide feedback to you if needed, or answer questions that you have about whether you're completing this in the way that's helpful. So hopefully this does not deter people sort of seeing what this entails, and we really help you through the process, walk you through it. All right, the next slide. So you can see here a more detailed timeline of what you can expect as a reviewer. So we will reach out to panelists who are a good fit for a particular panel between October to November. Not everyone who signs up to serve as a reviewer will be asked, in large part because it depends on a fit between your expertise and what's needed to cover the set of proposals on each panel, and of course, making sure that you don't have conflicts of interest. So you will receive this request via an email from one of the program directors for the NSF Engines program. When you receive this request, we very much hope that you will agree to serve, and we hope that you tell us that quickly. You'll then notify the program directors of any conflicts of interest for the sets of proposals on the panel, and you may be moved to a different panel if something arises that we cannot reconcile. You'll then be asked to attend a reviewer briefing webinar that, as I mentioned, will go into much more specific detail on the process and how to review. And it will include how to access the proposals and a further discussion on what makes a strong proposal from the perspective of the NSF Engines program. You will be assigned 6 to 8 proposals to review, and you'll have around 3 weeks to complete and submit those reviews. Several days after you submit your reviews, you will join the 2-day panel. And please note that it's very important that reviewers are available for the full 2 days of the panel. Okay, next slide. To say a little bit more now about the panel, each day will go from around 10:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Eastern time, so as to accommodate the various time zones across the country. And as I noted earlier, on the first day of the panel, the reviewers for each proposal will discuss the major strengths and weaknesses and come to a consensus as to the recommendation of the panel about the enthusiasm for each of the proposals on the panel. And also on this first day, for each proposal, one of the reviewers will take notes in a template similar to what I showed you a couple of slides back, and will summarize the discussion. Okay, the next slide. So this summary essentially tells the story of how the proposal ended up where it did, providing the collective perspective on the major strengths and weaknesses and the collective recommendation of the panel for that particular proposal. Okay, and the next slide. So drafts of these panel summaries, there we go, okay, are submitted prior to the second day. And then on the second day, the summaries and recommendations are finalized. Okay, next slide. So this is where we conclude the main part of the webinar. And in a moment, we'll move to the Q&A from all of you. But before that, go to the next slide. I want to tell you again, here's an overview of the ask for reviewers and the associated time commitment. So again, panelists will review 6 to 8 proposals, each of which will take around 2 hours to reasonably and effectively review. You'll then participate in 2-day panels, each of which will be up to 7 hours on a given day with a small assignment to be completed prior to the start of the second day. And while we do realize that this is not an insubstantial time commitment on your part, we hope that you have a sense now of the invaluable expertise that your participation will bring to this process and helping to grow the landscape of innovation across the US. So again, to do this effectively, if we go to the next slide, we need reviewers from across the US and across the range of sectors and topic areas and components that make up the innovation ecosystem. So if you have expertise in any of these aspects of the innovation ecosystem, we hope that you will agree to serve as a reviewer, and we look forward to working with you. So last thing, many of you have filled out the questionnaire to serve as a reviewer, but if you have ideas of others in your network who you think would be good reviewers for the program, please feel free to share the questionnaire with them as well. And you can see that link over here on this slide. And whether or not you have signed up already, we would very much appreciate if you can be sure in the questionnaire to let us know your availability for the specific panel dates that we have in the questionnaire. If you've already filled it out, you are actually able to go back in and add this information. Okay, so several of us on the program team will now answer your questions, and I will hand it over to Becky Shearman to facilitate the Q&A session.
All right, are we gonna bring all of us up? Oh, great, okay. All right, so I am gonna start off. We had at the beginning of the webinar, we had several questions about whether or not the slides or the recording is going to be available. So I just want to sort of start off with that we will be posting a recording of this that you can get to through the NSF Engines website. We won't be distributing slides, but you can access everything. You can access the recording through the website. All right, so with that, let's jump into some of the questions. Sorry. All right, Jeffrey, I am going to hand this over to you to kick us off. The question is, I am attending this webinar from Ethiopia. I am interested in reviewing proposals. Am I eligible?
Well, it's not Ethiopia especially, but reviewers from outside the US are permitted. However, there's no way to provide compensation for them. So you can review, you just won't receive compensation.
Great. Dimitri, can you serve as an NSF reviewer for Directorate A discussed today? So in TIP for the Engines program just discussed today, while submitting a proposal to a different NSF program, for example, iTest, which is in the EHR Directorate.
Yes, you can serve on the Engines panel, even though you've submitted a proposal to other directorates, other programs within NSF. As Michal mentioned, if there are any conflicts of interest, then we will resolve those, but that's not a conflict of interest, the fact that you submitted a proposal to another program.
Okay. Michal, I'm gonna direct this one to you. Can you discuss the merit review criteria for TIP projects and how they differ from conventional programs currently funded through NSF?
So maybe the question was specifically for the Engines program, because each program is going to have different criteria and is going to do it slightly differently. For the engines program, what we noted before was these 7 criteria specific to the engines program. And those really encompass what we are looking for strong proposals. So just as in a typical review process, we ask for the specific strengths and weaknesses, and we usually do it for specific criteria. Over here, the one difference is that for intellectual merit and broader impacts, if you're familiar with NSF's process, we're going to embed those within the specific criteria. It shouldn't make a difference in terms of you deciding whether or not you want to serve, and we'll explain more of those details at the time of the pre-panel briefing.
Thank you. Daniel, I'm going to ask this question. I'd like you to answer it as it pertains to the review process. This is a question that may be more aligned with just a general proposal question, but perhaps, if we can talk about it in terms of the review process. Does the NSF engine focus more on building research collaboration between multiple institutions, or the technical details and efficiency of the technique or system?
We're going to ask reviewers to look at the holistic engine that's put forward, both for the type 1s and the type 2s. So that includes our use-inspired research, our workforce development focus, our translation focus. So we're not going to ask people to evaluate just on the technical research or specifically on one aspect of it, but actually across the entire unit of the NSF engine and the goals that it looks to put forward and achieve within that region.
Great, thank you. All right, so Jeffrey, there's 2 here that are similar. So if we are submitting for a type 1, can we review a type 2 and vice versa? Right, so can you talk a little bit about the conflicts there?
So obviously this is a very large program with quite a few different organizations involved, many organizations. And so we've worked very hard to come up with NSF policy, a process that will allow us to continue to have the pool of reviewers be able to review proposals. So the bottom line is, even if you're a PI on a type 1 proposal, you'll still be eligible to review type 1 proposals, just not ones that are going to compete directly with your type 1. And similarly, you'll be able to review type 2 proposals and vice versa. So no one is excluded from the reviewer pool simply because they're a member of a type 1 or a type 2 proposal.
Thank you. Dimitri, how do you evaluate a quote unquote robust partnership when these need time, opportunity, and lots of interactions?
Sure. If we're talking type 1, then we're looking at the level of commitment by the partners themselves, right? So if we're going to develop a strong type 1 proposal, then we expect the reviewers to evaluate whether these are actual partnerships or not, or who's committed to actually carrying out the activities to produce a strong type 2. So that's what we will be looking for, an example of what we will be looking for in a type 1 proposal. It is possible that there could be some loosely connected partnerships that folks intend to develop during the actual award duration for the type 1, but there should be a fundamental team, a core team in place, and they should be able to demonstrate that they have a strong partnership commitments from the various organizations involved.
Thank you. Jeffrey, we've got a couple questions here around panels. So how big are the panels? If each panel reviews 15 proposals, how many proposals can they have for approval funding suggestions? I think that's a question about maybe how many may get funded.
Okay, well, let's start with the size of the panels. This is not absolute, but we're typically in a virtual panel looking for around 15 or 16 proposals and order of 10 reviewers for those proposals. It's a size that seems to work well in a virtual panel environment. In terms of how many can be awarded, there is no actual number. In fact, there was one earlier thing in the slides that maybe this is a good time to correct. The panels don't make funding recommendations. They provide feedback for the Engines team. The Engines team makes recommendations in terms of what things will get funded. So typically in a panel, the panelists are asked to evaluate the proposals, give them individual rankings, and then some level of ordering of the priorities the panel feels that apply to the proposals. After that, the program team will be looking at the results from multiple panels and making funding recommendations across multiple panels to NSF directors, management.
Thanks, Jeffrey. I'm actually going to throw this question to Thiaga. Is there any data to show that the review process removes bias?
Oh, that's a great question. I know it's a pressing question, especially for a competition of this magnitude. I have to say that NSF takes a lot of pride in being called the gold standard of merit review processes. We constantly assess and measure our review processes to make sure there is no bias in the system, or at least we minimize the bias in the system. Program officers are trained, from the get-go, and they're constantly retrained to watch for indicators of bias, and they're given training on how to address those situations when they do arise. Panelists will also be briefed on how to spot their own internal biases, and also how to respond to any bias that they observe in the discussion. So we ask them to intervene, by talking to the panelists or fellow panelists, or by engaging with the program officer in charge to point out any concerns that they may have. So you can rest assured that we pay close attention to it. This is a biggest consideration for NSF, that the process is seen as not just is fair, but it's also seen as fair.
Thanks, Thiago. Daniel, will panels be in person or virtual? And if in person, are travel costs covered?
They'll be virtual.
Thanks. To Mihal, I would think that if you are a federal employee of another agency, you would not be eligible for the $200 payment. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. Mihal, I'll go back to you. What disciplinary backgrounds are you looking for in reviewers?
So we're looking for a wide range of backgrounds. It's really a matter of if you can help evaluate different pieces of an innovation ecosystem. Essentially, what we're looking for when we select our reviewers for a given proposal is whether you're reflecting the various pieces of that proposal. So in terms of disciplinary backgrounds, we'd need probably someone with some level of that topic area, but really all the different aspects of the ecosystem, and whether the different parts are being integrated, and people are probably broad thinkers and comfortable outside of just their sort of topic area that they typically work on.
Thank you. Daniel, I'll throw this to you. Will it be considered a COI if you live in the same city or region as the proposed engine?
We're going to compose these panels in such a way where we're intentionally going to try to avoid geographic conflict of interest. So we're working through that process now. We'll deal with those on a case-by-case basis, but we're intentionally trying to build these panel pools in such a way that you will not be placed in something where there'll be a geographic COI. I don't know, Jeffrey, if there's anything else you want to add on that point. Okay.
All right, Jeffrey, back to you. So approximately how many reviewers do you anticipate needing?
Well, wish I knew the answer to that. It really depends on how many proposals we get. We're going to need several hundred, I can tell you that. But beyond that, I don't know the answer.
So I'm going to kind of collapse several of these here. So I don't know, Jeffrey, Daniel, any of you may want to jump in on this. So we're getting questions around the date range that they'll be conducted. For example, what months, if they are, if day 1 and 2 are spread apart or on consecutive days.
Let me take those two.
Okay.
So we're hoping to hold the panels during November and December. obviously not hitting holidays. And many of the panels will be split days. With virtual panels, that works really well. Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, but not all of them will be split days.
Okay. What does it mean? Oh, sorry. Let me see. Michal, I'll toss this one to you. So what does it mean to be involved in a type 1 proposal? Does it count as a conflict if you merely advised upfront but are not involved in actively developing the proposal?
So the greatest conflict is if you are senior personnel, but the additional aspects again will be considered as we put the panels together, because maybe part of your conflict is that you have collaborations of different sorts, of other sorts with maybe you've written papers together, or you have other things you're working on with members of certain proposals. So we'll figure that out at the time of figuring out the panels.
Great, thank you.
And Becky, if directly to the question, if you help someone develop a proposal or a project, then you will be required to disclose that as a collaboration, and then we would make a decision on what type of conflict that amounts to, just so folks can know that they should disclose if they've assisted, helped teams develop proposals and so forth.
Great. So Daniel, perhaps you can address this question. Will a group of reviewers be composed of the same mix of experience, academia, industry, institutional, etc.?
So we're interested in having cross-sector representation on every panel. We don't want it to be all individuals from a single sector, a single type of organization. We really want to have the same mix that we're asking proposals. We want to see that similar mix of lived experiences and backgrounds on the review panels. That's important to us, but the only way we can do that and do that well is if you all help us find a diverse mix of reviewers. So people from workforce development backgrounds, industry backgrounds, having led large-scale cross-sector collaboration. So we're doing a tremendous amount of work to try to build those diverse panels, but we also need your help in reaching out to people from across these sectors and telling them to asking them to fill out the Survey Monkey form as well. And then I wanted to go back to one thing that Jeffrey had mentioned earlier, and that is if you filled out the Survey Monkey form and you didn't put in your dates, it's okay to fill it out again or edit your form to include your dates, because that makes it easier for us to do this kind of jigsaw puzzle of putting everyone together. We'll still reach back out to you and ask you for your dates, but if you do have time, if you didn't put in your dates that you're available in the upcoming months, it would be really helpful if you can either edit your form or resubmit it with those dates.
And Becky, I want to add, we keep getting questions about the makeup of the panels and perhaps the qualifications and topic areas and these things. So if we were writing a job description, if you will, of a review panelist for the Engines program, it might go something like this. And this is just an example. Reviewers must have a deep and broad experience and knowledge in at least one of the following categories: leadership management of large-scale public-private partnerships, youth-inspired research, workforce development, economic development, including growth strategy and implementation, diversity and inclusion strategy and implementation, research translation, entrepreneur ecosystems. Under youth-inspired research, obviously, there will be subtopic areas under there depending on the topic areas of the proposal. But you might imagine that we'll receive proposals in areas in broad areas such as climate change, energy, manufacturing, other science and engineering disciplines that could serve as a foundation for an innovation ecosystem. All right, and so a reviewer will be expected to provide insights and analysis of all the proposals. They're going to provide advice to the program team. And so if we were writing a job description, soliciting reviewers, it would look something like that. So that will be the makeup of the individual panels to be able to really analyze an engine and in an integrated way, a comprehensive way, and provide a fair analysis for both type 1 and or type 2 proposals. So that I hope that is clear on what we're looking for in terms of reviewers.
But
Dimitri, I'd like
just
to
be clear-
follow up on that. Can
Yeah.
you maybe speak a little bit more? We have a question here. So, for example, if you have expertise in nonprofits and community organizations, DEIA, would you be only reviewing those aspects of the proposals, or would you still be expected to review all aspects of the proposal?
Yeah, so okay, so that's a good question. So obviously, if you are highlighting a particular area as your area of expertise, that might be where the panel leans on you for the greatest amount of input and guidance. But I really would think that, when we talk about developing an innovation ecosystem, which is the job of the engine, it's really an integrated activity, right? And so diversity and inclusion would span perhaps all the areas that we talk about, whether it's workforce development, whether it's use-inspired research. And so we will want, to understand whether this engine or whether this proposal is really an integrated and comprehensive proposal. And so we would expect the reviewers to be able to at least address, whether it's an integrated project or not, or whether it's siloed and so forth. So yes, we would expect your area of expertise to have to be your primary focus, but you're certainly not limited to, evaluating only that aspect of the proposal.
Great, thank you. And right, so we anticipate, people are going to have strengths in certain areas. They're not going to be experts in other areas. We would still encourage you to consider being a reviewer. And at the same token, we could also see you may have both, academic expertise and industry expertise, right? There may be some things where you do have. All of that is great, and we would welcome reviewers with that broad range of expertise. Maybe we can move now to this question here about disclosing your reviewer. Jeffrey, could you talk a little bit about whether or not a reviewer can disclose that they served on a panel? And does this mean that not disclosing means that we can't reveal that we served on a panel, particularly to, say, our employers?
So the basic answer is you can't reveal that you're on a panel for the Engines program. You may reveal to your employer that you're reviewing for NSF. That's fine. You can, if you're thinking about your annual review or something like that, you can say you served on an NSF panel. Ideally, you would not put the dates. The idea is to preserve the anonymity of the panel, but not that it's not a secret that you served as a reviewer for NSF or an NSF panel in general. There was another question there about confidentiality. Let me go ahead and answer that. There was a question whether people are expected to sign a confidentiality agreement or a conflict of interest agreement. Yes, all panelists will be asked to sign a form that preserves that they agree to preserve the confidentiality of the panel. That includes who were the reviewers on the panel, what proposals were on the panel, anything about the panel. So it falls into the same category. The basic idea is we don't want individuals who had proposals in a competition to be able to connect you in any way with the review of that proposal.
All right. Thanks, Jeffrey. And I just want to remind folks, it looks like we're getting more and more questions in the chat that are tied to questions about proposals. We want to try to keep the questions related to the review process. So I'm trying to pull those out of this list here. How much, so we are getting questions around the amount of lead time they'll have between sort of selecting dates where they're available, finding out if they've been selected to serve on a panel, how will they know they've been selected to serve on a panel? Maybe someone can speak to those questions in general.
Would you like me to do that?
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
So essentially the way this works is the various program officers on this team will be leading different panels. And when it gets down to the level of an individual panel, we'll be sending out emails to people who are candidates for reviewers, that includes many of you, asking if you're available to serve on a particular panel. You hopefully will respond quickly. After we've assembled the set of panelists that we need, we'll be sending out information about the proposals, both to collect information about conflict of interest, but also your preferences as a reviewer. You won't be reviewing all the proposals on a panel, you'll be reviewing a subset. So we try to match the proposals against your confidence or your interests in reviewing particular proposals. Once we've done that, we'll be giving you a list of proposals to review, and typically you'll have about 3 weeks to do the reviews before the panel date. So the very early panels, we're going to have to really jump to keep to that deadline. But as the dates move out, it'll be easier to ensure that you have at least 3 weeks.
All right, Michal, I'm going to throw this one in your direction. So in the expected commitment, so in the presentation we provided, it's listed that roughly 2 hours per proposal for the review. This person says that seems a quite short time to evaluate a proposal. What is, in your experience, a realistic time per proposal for reviewers on average?
I think that, maybe the first proposal or two maybe takes a little bit longer, but as reviewers get a sense of what sort of the structure is and what makes a proposal strong or weak, I think 2 hours does end up being probably a pretty reasonable length of time.
Great.
And Becky, keep in mind, and these are type 1 proposals. Now, type 2 proposals, you may have significantly longer time, but type 1 proposals, 15 pages, and what's being asked of the reviewers, I think on average, 2 hours is what we see in most kind of development planning proposals. Or 2 hours is what's reported to us. That maybe we should say that.
Great. Dimitri, maybe you can speak to this question. Will NSF prioritize panel consensus, for example, converging on one score through discussion, or diversity in panelists' assessments, for example, scoring individually whether anonymized or not? For example, NASA panelists typically use the latter strategy.
What's the options again, Becky? I'm sorry.
Converging on one score through discussion, or the diversity of panelist assessments, so scoring individually, whether or not they're anonymized.
Okay, so for NSF reviews and panel summary, everything is anonymized, right? I assume that's it. If from the nothing about the reviewer goes to the actual proposer. So each reviewer will give their own individual rating or score, if you will. And they will make that determination prior to actual panel day. And then during the discussion, they may realize, oh, I made a mistake. They'll have some freedom to modify their score after the panel discussion if they choose to, but they're not required to. But the panel itself will then come to an agreement on their advice, their collective advice to NSF on whether they want to make the case that this is a highly recommended proposal versus not recommended proposal. And so essentially we'll have both. We'll have the individual perspectives and then we'll have the collective panel guidance or scoring, if you will. I think that answers that question.
And Becky, maybe I'll just add one piece, because I think part of the question also was, what if there's kind of a wide range of scores? Then do we care about that? So the answer is yes, we do. We do care about that. If the panel is not coming to a consensus, it really is the role of the program directors to make sure that the panel summary captures what the discussion was like. So if it's really split, we ask the panelists to capture that in the panel summary so that we go to our discussions internally with all of that information, really taking into account the range of perspectives.
Great, thanks. So Jeffrey, are there any system or software requirements for virtual panelist computers and devices?
Well, okay. There are two parts to this. Of course, there's the virtual panel itself. You need the same, the same sorts of video and audio support that you need to do Zoom and Teams or any other kind of communication, video communication. The software for the actual review process is all web-based in terms of uploading your reviews, making your recommendations, those kinds of things. So the basic answer is nothing that you're not using right now.
Thank you. Daniel, since type 1 proposals will be focused on planning partnerships as opposed to funding technical research, would people from academia with research backgrounds be discouraged to serve as a reviewer on type 1 panels?
Nobody is discouraged from serving on any panels. We are going to be looking for the same mix of experience for the type 1s and the type 2 reviewer pools, and we really want to have cross-sector representation. But at no point in this process will anyone be discouraged from serving as a reviewer, assuming they meet kind of the criteria that we're looking for in terms of past experience.
Thank you. All right, so I'm not sure we touched on this explicitly, so I want to throw it to the panel again. Jeffrey, you may be able to answer this question. So approximately how far ahead of time will one know which panel they are assigned to, for which days?
Okay, so you'll be asked by a program officer to serve on a particular panel. And for the very first week of panels, it's probably going to be tight. 4 weeks is what we're looking at. But as time goes out, you should have more than 4 weeks advance notice. You'll get an email. We'll ask if you can serve in a panel on a particular set of dates. If you can't, then we'll put you back in the pool of panelists. It's basically the way it works.
Thanks. Dimitri, can you speak a little bit about how we will determine whether a reviewer has a conflict of interest, and specifically, not so much what entails a conflict, but how we are going to figure that out, how we're going to communicate that to them, and if it's incumbent on us or them to figure that out?
Okay, so certainly it depends on the reviewer disclosing information to us, right? So once we, so the process that Jeffrey outlined, we will ask if you are available to serve on a panel. If you agree, then shortly after that, you will receive a document describing potential conflicts of interest. And then you should, figure out, do you fit into any of these categories? And I think for the most part, they're quite clear. Once you receive the list of proposals, then you should, again, look at the proposal, look at the personnel that's included in the proposal. Maybe we missed something, maybe you didn't see a full list of personnel, so you look at the proposal again, make sure that you don't have a conflicts of interest with any folks in the proposals, any organizations within the proposal. For example, if you have financial interest in a particular company that's listed, then that may create a conflict of interest. So essentially, we're just pointing out the areas where conflicts could occur, and it's up to the panelists to disclose to us if there is a possible conflict of interest. If they think there is, they should disclose to us and let us help determine whether there's an actual conflict or not. So that's the process. Now, some things we'll be able to determine ahead of time, because we'll know that, okay, we shouldn't pick person A because they are employed by this entity or they are in this region. So some of them we'll be able to determine even before we ask for the disclosures. I think I captured all of that. Jeffrey, am I missing anything there?
No, I'll add one thing. That is, one thing we will do is pull all the data together internally about all of the partner organizations and the senior personnel associated with each proposal. And so it's incumbent on the program directors to try really to eliminate most of the top level conflicts. There are things we can't know, so you'll be asked, to look at, as Dimitri said, to look at the proposals as well to see if you have any obvious conflicts. You may not know if it's a conflict. You may have to ask the program officer and say, I have this relationship with this company or this organization, or my spouse has a relationship with them. Is it a conflict? And we can answer the question. So it's not up to you necessarily to decide whether it's a conflict. It's only up to you to identify things you might possibly be a conflict and let us know.
Great. So we've got a question here that I'm gonna just answer quickly. Question about, is the grant available for panelists to look at prior to seeing grant apps? I believe that's a question about the actual call for funding, the BAA. And yes, you can actually access that through our website, which perhaps we can drop in the chat so that you can link directly to it. For Daniel, how will we determine if the reviewers have strengths in the areas that they check off? Are we going to be looking or asking for CVs or resumes? Are we looking at LinkedIn?
Well, in the Survey Monkey form, we ask people to self-identify areas where they have strengths, and then we'll do some vetting on our end. We'll look at the links that you shared, if that was LinkedIn or otherwise. And if we have additional questions, we'll reach out to you to see if it's a good fit for the different panels. So we are going to be doing an additional layer of vetting beyond just taking the names that we receive. But we're also going to be looking at things that you identify, because it's possible that there's strengths that you have that might not come through in a CV or a resume. And we appreciate you sharing that proactively with us.
Thank you. So Michal, for new reviewers, will we get some kind of training or something along those lines?
Yes, actually, both new reviewer, all reviewers. We will be having the we call pre-panel briefings, and so that will come pretty much at the time that you get your review assignments, and so that will help give you details of how you will do the review process, where you log in. It will give you the opportunity to ask questions, and we'll walk you through the process. We don't want it to be a barrier of any kind if you haven't served, and in fact, if we do not get a lot of panels with new reviewers, that will be not a good thing for the program. So we are looking for many new reviewers here.
Thank you. Actually, I'm going to jump to a different question because I think it follows up well here. Some of our partners are nonprofits, and they feel that only academics are qualified to serve as a reviewer. This Q&A today makes it clear to me that NSF would like reviewers from many perspectives. What can I share or say that would help to encourage those who may feel very intimidated by this process and time commitment? I'm going to let the group decide who wants to take that question.
Yeah, Becky, I'll just chime in first, and then maybe Michal. I know she's thought about this pretty deeply. So certainly we want all reviewers, as we've stated, and as Michal mentioned, nonprofits, industry folks that may not typically serve on NSF panels, we need them for this program. And as Michal mentioned, there will be pre-panel briefings. We're going to provide various templates and guidance for folks to walk them through the process. So they shouldn't let the fact that they haven't served before or it's a new process, or perhaps uncomfortable judging proposals and these things to deter them from serving. The program team will provide significant training and guidance all along the way.
I want to add something, because what we've heard about mostly has been the workload and things like that. There is no better way to learn about what makes a competitive NSF proposal than to serve on a panel. You learn a tremendous amount from seeing how people respond to proposals, the kind of comments they have, kind of feedback they give. And, it's something I, as an academic, always recommend to my young new colleagues that the first thing they should do is try hard to get assigned to a panel. And this goes into nonprofits as well. If in the future you think you're going to be competing for NSF funding in any way, this is your best way to find out what it means, how proposals are reviewed, what makes a strong proposal, what makes a weak proposal, how people respond to the way things are written, how just simple changes in structure could have made the proposal much better. So it's a huge opportunity if you're at all interested in learning about the process of writing proposals, not just selecting proposals.
And on the flip side, just building on what Jeffrey, Dimitri, and Michaela said, even if you never plan on ever submitting a proposal, if you think this is important for our country to have strong NSF engines all across the country, and you think it's important to launching new startups, to driving more equitable economic development, and you don't think government has always gotten it right, here's your opportunity to be involved in the process of helping inform how we review these applications. So it's a really unique opportunity as even a private citizen who may or may not ever submit an NSF engine proposal or an NSF proposal to really be on the ground floor and help us identify these first set of engines across the country and help us rethink the way we do economic development and innovation strategy as a nation.
Thank you, Daniel. All right, so Dimitri, maybe you can address this. So we've got some questions around sort of some of the more practical aspects of serving on a panel. So as one person indicates, in the past when they've served on a panel, they've received a certificate of appreciation or something like that. So they're curious if that would be something that would be available. And then kind of related to that, if you're supposed to be keeping things confidential, as a reviewer, how do you request days off for the panels when you're talking to your employer? So getting the days off and then also maybe getting credit outside of NSF.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so that's a good point. So yeah, we can provide thank you certificates and these things. That's not a problem. In terms of keeping the panel confidential, so as Jeffrey mentioned, you can state that to your employer that you are serving on an NSF panel as a reason for being taken off days and these types of things. That I don't think that's the issue in terms of confidentiality. The issue is more you don't want to, and you can even tell your obviously they'll know the dates. It will be. I don't think you want to say I'm serving on an NSF Engines panel on November 2022, right? 2021, right? So that ties you to a particular panel, right? So we're trying to eliminate the proposers from being able to determine who actually served on a panel. And so we make it a huge point on our end not to disclose those things. And so it creates a number of other issues if a panelist identifies other members on the panel or that he or she served on the panel. So we're trying to maintain confidentiality from that perspective. You can disclose to your employer that you're going to serve on a panel at NSF on these two particular days. That's not a problem at all.
Great. Jeffrey, I'll throw this one to you. So we're getting some questions about who's eligible to review. Are physicians eligible, or are we interested in having physicians? Are postdocs and PhD students eligible to review?
The short answer is yes, although obviously more experience is better in that regard. Typically, in my experience, I haven't asked PhD students to serve. Postdocs, yes. Physicians, yes. I'm not going to say categorically no PhD student would be asked to serve, but it's typically not the case.
Great.
And yeah, Becky, yes. So I agree, Jeffrey. Typically, the traditional PhD student, but obviously you could have folks that are full-time industry folks that are also PhD students, and they may want to serve as from their industry perspective, as opposed to just a PhD student. So just a caveat there.
Great. Nihal, this one's for you. What do you consider expertise in the areas that you call for? Is practical experience enough, or do you require deep knowledge of the scientific research on the topic?
So it's certainly not only scientific knowledge, right? So, I mean, if you're coming from industry, then hopefully you have an idea of how industry functions. Maybe you've been part of developing startups. Maybe you've been part of an accelerator, maybe venture capital. You know, it really depends. So there's practical experience. There's the experience of knowing if you know, if a team has considered all of the different partners and members who should be on it, right? If there's the expertise of understanding where the state of practice is in a given area. So it's really a range of areas. If you think you have something to contribute to understanding and what makes a strong innovation ecosystem, or sort of building that team for a strong innovation ecosystem, then those are the types of reviewers who we want.
Great, thank you. Jeffrey, will NSF send follow-up questions to panelists after the review panel? For example, if there's a lack of consensus, or is the extent of commitment done after 2 days?
Well, typically, no. We typically need to get the panel to converge on some kind of collective evaluation. The only things that would be follow-ups is if something has slipped through that needed a correction. You know, sometimes there's some language in a review that gets missed that is not constructive. We always look for reviews to be constructive, and so you might be asked by a program officer to moderate language, but that's not the norm at all. Typically, the end of the panel is the end of your obligation to the review process.
Becky, you're muted.
Sorry, my cat was starting to meow. Nihal, can you talk about whether or not reviewers will be expected to evaluate the budget?
So we don't ask for an explicit evaluation of the budget. That said, the reviewers certainly have access to the budget, and we want reviewers to consider, you know, to a certain extent, whether it looks reasonable, or really, or are there red flags?
Great, thank you.
And Becky, if I might add, so you might expect if there are partnerships within the described within the proposal, if there are collaborations from groups that are not necessarily receiving funds from NSF, you would expect that the budget should reflect the level of commitment that groups are claiming to commit to the proposal, right? So from that perspective, you can imagine that a reviewer would examine the budget to see who is committing to what work and how much of commitment is being made in these types of things. That might be a consideration.
Great. Jeffrey, will we have guidelines on reviewing strategies to, you know, read them all quickly first, review each one in more detail, or something like that? Or are there online resources that they could use for guidelines?
Well, we won't give printed guidelines, I don't think, but it is likely we'll ask you to do one early so you can get some feedback on the review process. In my experience, having also been a reviewer for many years, it's a good idea to look at the proposals early to get a sense of where they are, what the topics are. But And you may want to, review several and then go back to the first couple once you've kind of got your pattern down of how you think the review writing process should go. Those who've done a lot of reviews in the past probably just start at the beginning and go to the end and they're just done with it. But for the first time, you may have to go through a few of them more than once till you've calibrated yourself on what you think the appropriate language would be in the review.
Great, thank you. Mihal, will we have access to a scoring rubric?
So we generally explained what reviewers are going to be looking at and the guidance. We are still thinking amongst our team exactly how we want to present that, so that it's most effective in terms of the reviewers providing feedback to us and us getting that feedback. And so we will have that available at the time of setting up the panels.
Great. All right, just sort of scrolling through what's remaining here.
So Becky, I think if I can address one of these questions about the length of time and what it actually takes to write a well thought out review,
Great.
and whether it might take longer than 2 hours or not. So, so typically the process, so obviously all of us have served on panels at some point in our career. And I imagine the process goes similar to what I normally do. You read proposals, you may read, multiple proposals simultaneously without or sequentially without writing anything. You're just trying to get an understanding of, what the proposals are thinking, what the program is asking for. You need to read the program announcement to understand review criteria. All these things go into writing a, well thought out review that's going to be helpful to the program and to the panel, but also writing a review that provides meaningful feedback to the proposals themselves, right? Because potentially they could come back in another round, potentially. And so that's the nature of the job. But we talked about 2 hours. It may take longer than 2 hours, but there's typically some, iterative process that a reviewer needs to go through to really, focus in and understand, number one, what the program is about and what the review criteria actually are, and then really, reading the proposal itself, perhaps multiple times, to digest the material and understand what the team is actually proposing. So that's a typical process that an individual reviewer will go through as they try to kind of analyze and then articulate, their analysis of the proposal. So that's the typical process. However long it takes an individual reviewer, that's the time it would take. But I just wanted to make it clear on what the program team would expect from a reviewer and what they are delivering to NSF in terms of their individual reviews. And then on the day of the panel, each reviewer will have the opportunity to, in a sense, provide their analysis of the proposal. And there will be someone assigned in the panel who is scribing, who is simply writing down what they hear. And each reviewer will have an opportunity to present their case, and then the collective group will have a discussion about the proposal and provide some advice to the program director. The program director, in turn, may be asking additional questions of the panelists. If the program director feels that an issue wasn't discussed, or a panelist raised a particular issue but didn't cite any real evidence of something that was lacking. So the program director, he or she may be asking additional questions, and the scribe is outlining this entire conversation. And eventually the reviewers will need to write a summary of that discussion and offer that as advice to the program. So I just wanted to make it clear. I know there are a lot of questions about the time commitment and whether it's actually 2 hours or longer than 2 hours, or is that enough to make it a robust review? But that's the process that one might go through in an actual, as an individual reviewer, and then participated in a panel.
Great, thank you, Dimitri. We have had a few questions come in about international reviewers or non-US citizen reviewers. Can they participate on a panel and can they get compensated?
So yes, so generally international, yeah, we could have international reviewers. They cannot get compensated, is the general answer. But if you are an international reviewer, I suggest that you would reach out to the program team specifically. You can send an email directly to engines@nsf.gov to reach us if you have questions about that. You're muted again, Becky.
My apologies. Let me. Sorry, just kind of scrolling through a lot of questions here. Okay, here's a question maybe for you, Daniel. Are you interested in evaluating whether the sector or topic is a good fit for the particular region? So in the review, is that something that we're going to be looking at?
It is a good question. I mean, we're going to want to see some evidence that we think you can become a leader in that topic area over a 10+ year period. You have the assets in place. So, you know, reading through these applications, you'll be able to get a sense of why they think that this is the right topic area for their region and why they think they can become a leader in that region. So you'll be evaluating what they put forward in their proposal. So we don't expect you to be an expert on X and Y place, but we hope that you can, you know, pull out from the proposals some of the pertinent information, and understanding fully that type 1 proposals are for very early stage ecosystem. So they might just be in that kind of early step in the process of figuring out their topic area and figuring out why they have a unique advantage in that area.
Great. So we have a few questions here, sort of clarifying questions around the survey. Can people update their survey answers, or should they just submit a new one?
It's a good question. I believe I changed it so that you could fill it out at least more than once. I'm not sure what the rules were on updating. So if you're not able to update your response, just fill it out again with the same information you put in last time, but add in whatever additional information you didn't do, and we'll just be able to sort it and pull out the duplicates. So if you are not able to edit it, then just fill it out again with the additional information that you weren't able to provide the first time through.
And another SurveyMonkey question here. If we are involved in any proposals, I guess that they're asked if you're involved in any proposals, would advising a team or teams as part of my job in research development count as being involved?
If you're directly speaking to teams about their proposals or are a core partner, you should just, in that question, you should just say, yes, I am advising a type 1 or a type 2. It will not preclude you from being able to participate. We just need to know so we can appropriately assign people to different panels. So might ask some additional details at a later point if you do click that, but yes, you should click that box if you are advising, working with a team that is applied for either a type 1 or a type 2.
Okay. Jeffrey, will program managers provide reviewers with feedback on their performance? That feedback would be great for first-time reviewers after it's done.
Oh, that's an interesting question. You'll get subtle feedback in the sense of if you review, I'll give you one example. We want reviews to be truthful but constructive. So if there are negative things you need to say about a proposal, you want to say it in a factual way and not in an argumentative way, for example. And during the panel or prior to the panel, we may be asking you to try to be more constructive in a particular sentence or something like that. I think the best thing you'll learn in terms of feedback is by looking at the other reviews. When you're in the panel, you have the opportunity to read all the reviews, even for the proposals that you didn't review, except in the cases of a conflict of interest. Let's put that aside. And so you can learn from that experience. I'm sure that the program officers in the panel would give you feedback about how you might improve in future panels if you wanted that information. But there's no direct, you get a final report about how you did on the panel kind of thing.
To Michal for this one, will reviewers be allowed to click links in proposals and conduct additional investigation beyond the application submitted?
That is not, we do not like you to do that. So you're supposed to evaluate based on what is in the proposal. You have a certain number of pages. That's what you evaluate on.
All right, thank you.
Let me add to this. There are not supposed to be links in the proposal. That's something we check in compliance checking. So you're not supposed to have links to additional information as a proposer. So the flip side of that is if they're in the proposal, you shouldn't be following them as a reviewer.
Okay.
So Becky, I saw a question in there that we may want to address, which was about if people do not know their availability,
Mm-hmm.
can they still serve? What should they do about that?
Okay.
And make your best guess. It's probably better to indicate when you might be available, and then you will receive that email request from a program director asking if you're available. And if at that point you know when you are, then you can let us know then. But it's probably better to give some sense of when you might be available.
And there was another question about the email address that they would likely be receiving information about whether or not they're serving on a panel, where would that be coming from so that it doesn't land in their junk mail? I believe that would be coming from the program officer leading the panel, correct?
Right. So
That's correct.
NSF,
So it'll be an NSF email address from the program director.
Okay, we had one other question about eligibility of reviewers. How about the question says resident alien? I think that would be equivalent to a green card holder. Are they eligible to serve as a reviewer?
good question.
Yes, if you have a green card, you're eligible to serve as a reviewer. It's really, you can't receive compensation unless you're a green card or holder or a citizen.
Yeah.
Is it a requirement to have had earlier collaborations between corporate partners, academia, government, local community, et cetera, to be able to evaluate the impact of the proposals in general? I'll throw this to Dimitri.
Okay. I'm sorry, Becky. The question is it a requirement to have had prior?
To have experience in these sort of cross-sector partnerships in order to impact the proposals in general.
So I wouldn't say it's a requirement that you've had these experiences, right? I mean, if you are serving in use-inspired research, for example, it's not required that you have had that experience, but I mean, certainly it will be a great benefit to us as a program and to the evaluation, the depth of the evaluation, if you understand kind of the nuances and interactions among the different entities and really what it takes to make meaningful partnerships. But again, I wouldn't say that it's a requirement. I mean, you can make a case as to where you can contribute to analyzing the proposal. So I'll leave it there. I think that answers the question.
All right. We are actually over time. We have gotten just when we addressed the green card holder question, a few others have popped in. So maybe we can try to tackle those before we wrap up. So if a non-citizen is working at a US institute, are they considered an international reviewer? And is there any extra process if you've already submitted the interest form and you're a non-citizen? And H-1B holders as well. That's another question.
So Becky, might I suggest that maybe we can, whoever is asking the question can submit to NSF, to engines@nsf.gov. We can provide an answer in the FAQ as well related to that, but I think generally the answer is around, there are some rules about if the non-US citizen has a salary position, I guess, or the type of position they have at the university or organization, and that tells us something about whether how NSF treats them. So and I don't know all the specific details of the rules, but
Fantastic. So yes, I think in general, if you've got questions that were not answered, you should email us at engines@nsf.gov and we will address them. Other than that, I think we are going to wrap up. Do we have any parting words from program officers on the call?
I'll say one thing, please don't rule yourselves out from being a reviewer. Whether you can review or not will be figured out at the time of us hopefully selecting you to serve. You'll ask us your detailed questions then, and hopefully it will work out. And thank you for considering joining.
Okay. Well, with that,
all right, thank you.
that's the end.